Hi, everyone, and welcome to a new session with Code with Sally. I'm super happy and excited for today's session. I have Beech here with me today. Beech is like very helpful and very generous, and he agreed to share his knowledge with the community. So I'm super grateful for you, Beech. And for anyone who doesn't know Beech, he is a developer that turned into an architect, and he has a long history of technology, security, programming, and operations. And he turned out from Trailhead Scout to 48 plus certificate. That's too many certificate, Beech, into under 2 years. So, I'm very happy and super glad to have you here, and I'm ready myself to learn from you. So, I will hand it over to you. And before doing that, anyone who's joining us for the first time, Code with Sally usually run every week, and we upload the recordings to the sessions on YouTube. So feel free to subscribe and check the other videos for any sessions you missed. And this one as well will be recorded, and we'll upload the video after the session on YouTube. So keep an eye if you have to drop mid-session. You will not be missing the rest of the information. But stick around and ask your questions. I will be collecting your questions while Beach talking, and whenever Beach you will find a good time to stop and take questions, I will have them ready for you in the chat. So yeah, I will hand it over to you, and I'm super excited and thank you so much. I cannot find enough words to express how I am grateful for your time and super excited to have you here.
Well, thank you very much, Sally. And yeah, I'm very grateful for what you're doing for the community as well. It doesn't go unnoticed by a lot. So we were originally talking about vibe coding and Agentforce Vibes, amongst other tools. And there's a lot of questions about the whole ecosystem, the whole way of doing things with vibe coding. There are a lot of questions people have that keep coming up. And there's a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt. A lot of people scared by things, a lot of people worried that they're missing out. So we wanted to do a video that kind of set the level for what Agent Force Vibes is, what it can do, what the tooling provides, as well as other vibe coding. Because you'll hear Cursor, you'll hear Windsurf, you'll hear Claude. And a lot of people kind of want to know, what are the different systems? How do they work? How do we think about it? And this will be split into two sessions. So we're going to have the one today where it's nice and gentle. We want to bring everyone on the journey. We want everyone to understand the tools and how it works. This will be nice and easy. Then the second session will be going harder and going right. Now we know the concepts. How do we put it into practice? So this one, nice and gentle. If I'm going too fast, if there's any questions, this is the session to get it out together as a team. Okay. So I'm going to be kicking off. Where's the share button? There we are. And going for a window. We're going to be not in presenter mode, just in kind of edit mode in Canva. That way, if there's any questions, any deep dives we want to do, we can edit it, we can draw it out. So I'm just going to keep this nice and light. So right now, we need tools with Agentforce Vibes to get great results. If you're using Agentforce Vibes on its own, if you've tried it out, you might be a little disheartened in place with where it is right now as a product. It may not be doing what you need. You might need to tweak things. You might need to edit things. And I really wanted to kind of explain why that is. So we're going to look today at 6 main topic areas. And these have got the scary words that you may have heard of, you may already know, you may not know. Don't worry, we're going to be explaining each one to begin with. So, first of all, we have tokens. And tokens play such a key part. But what is a token? I'm going to use OpenAI's tokenizer, and don't worry, there'll be links given out at the end and available in the description. So the tokenizer takes text that you enter and turns it into tokens that the AI model will understand. Every model has a different set of tokens under the scenes. We don't need to dwell too much on the exact ones, but let's just see it in action. Let's see when people are talking about tokens, what on earth is that? So I'm going to put in code with Sully one here. a phrase. Hello, I'm a bear called Cody, and I'm writing this with my bare hands. So if we look at the tokens that are produced underneath, we can see there are 18 tokens for this phrase. It was originally 72 characters. So this text here is 72 characters long, and the tokens that are produced are only 18. So what it's doing is it's reading the text and converting it into what it calls tokens, which is its understanding of that text. If it instead did character by character, we couldn't build it out meaning, we couldn't build out understanding. So if I look at the word hello, it's hello here. That's token ID 13,225. So it's like each of these tokens has got an ID number. And when we do tokenization, when we take text and turn it into tokens, what we're doing is like this color coding. We're just breaking it apart and turning it into these numbers. I'm hoping that's working out nicely for the visual, for how we're going from one to the other. If we do something a little bit more complex, like a longer bit of text here, we can see we've got repeating tokens again, even for things like hyphens and dashes. And if we head into token IDs, you can see there's a token ID number one. And that token ID number one is probably the most popular thing. So these token numbers, the most popular one is just a quotation mark on its own. So what it's seen as that's one of the most popular things possible. So the lower the number, the more popular it is. The higher the number, the less frequently it appears. So whenever you've got a block of text, a block of code, anything you're shoving into an AI, what it's going to do is tokenize. Take that text, turn it into tokens. Each of these tokens have got a number. And then what it can do is look for similar tokens. As in, I've got this block of text and it's got these numbers. What else shares these token numbers? What else have got these token IDs in order to bring in things that are related, things that match? One of these tokens might be a variable name. It might be string, it might be integer, it might be one of these types. And all it's going to do is use these numbers to find matching things in order to understand meaning and bring it together. I'm hoping there's some questions at this point.
And there is one question, like you mentioned that the smaller the number, the higher. So who decide this? Like, is it based on how many times the text got repeated in my like prompt, or it's across the web, like how popular it is?
It depends. So to begin with, you'll normally do a sort based on popularity on
Mm-hmm.
here, and it works a bit like if you've ever gone into algorithms like how zip works, the zip compression algorithm.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you make a zip file, the lower the number, the better, because if you're doing branching or anything like that in maths, the more popular something is, the lower the number it is, the less data you need.
Mm-hmm.
So you tend to have these numbers lower. Now, these models have gone through several phases, so it might be that something that's more popular ends up with a higher number just because they can't be bothered to reorder it, or it's just grown and been put on top, or you've done something like bespoke the model on top. So any of your bespoke customizations appear after that, so they'll have higher numbers. But a good rule of thumb is the lower the number, the more popular it is, although in some cases that doesn't play out.
And another question, like if is does that mean it's better like to be mindful when writing a prompt, whether like to add a double quotes or a full stop or like extra characters here and there, like that for us as a human, it makes sense to add?
Generally, all numbers below 256 will be the same number of bytes.
Mm-hmm.
So whether it's a single quote or a double quote or anything like that, they're generally the same amount, but you may want to consider brevity in characters. So things like when you're coding, there's things like null deletion, which is a term, but it's basically like let's say I want a string and the string is going to be foo equals bar. So I've got a string here, and I might go string baz equals foo question mark no. Okay. So what that's going to do is a null colletion, which means if foo is null, it'll be bar, it'll be null. If foo isn't null, it'll be bar. And that's now 114 characters long. Sorry, 14 tokens long.
Hmm.
So I'm going to copy that. I'm now going to change this to be foo baz. If foo equals null, then I want baz equals nar, else baz equals foo. So if I wrote that out, that's now 31 tokens rather than 14 tokens.
Hmm.
So brevity in code not only reduces your tokens, it can be easier to read, but the real thing is you want to make sure you've got code that is common, that these numbers match, that is
Hmm.
brief without being complicated. So let's say you had a younger developer team. You might not want to use null colletion. You might want to use if statements because that younger developer team might be better suited to understanding how if statements work. Whereas these more complicated things like what's a question mark mean? So you need to balance your team, the complexity, the tokens, and really think about making your code expressive and making it easy to understand. I've got a preference for these shorthand functions, but if I had a younger developer team in, I'd certainly stay away from them and reduce that complexity down. And it's easy enough. There's a few bits when we get into section 4 where
Okay.
you can convert from one to the other.
Hmm.
So you don't need to make these decisions and stick with them. You can change it based on team dynamics. You're coming into a project, you need it easier and flip it and reverse.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Um, let's say also this is a new language feature. So let's say this came in Spring 26 as an example. If you're now using a model, so if I'm using something like Agentforce Vibes, a lot of the code in Vibes seems to be around API version 62. If I'm using a cutting edge feature, it's not going to have that built into the model. Um, it's not going to know these connections between things. It's too new. So you might not get the support you need from the code. So there's little bits of nuance and little bits of complexity. You can teach the model, but you kind of want to go with the path of least resistance, both for your team and for the AI.
Okay. There is
Anything else
another,
popping up?
yeah,
Go
there
for it.
is another question. Like, what's the importance of like knowing what this a token is and how we can use it, the count tokenizer in real-time project?
So you've got a limit on the number of tokens in to your model. So when you write a prompt, if you write a prompt that's too long, it starts ignoring the details. You've got the context, which is like the memory, like the if you imagine the amount of the RAM, or if you're working on a document, what's on that document, what's on that page. Now, that's also got a limit on the number of tokens. And the trouble is, if you have too many tokens, it'll start forgetting things, or it will start merging similar tokens together. So it'll be looking at, these numbers here, and it might go, oh, we've got 314 twice. I'm only going to reduce it down to being once, and it will start forgetting some of the details about the sequence of numbers, the details behind it. So that's the context. You've got the input where you need to be careful of the tokens. You've got the context where you need to be careful of the tokens, otherwise it forgets things. So it will either ignore what you're saying, it'll forget what it's doing, and on the output side, if there's too many tokens, you're gonna have it stop. It'll just stop halfway through outputting text and go, that's enough. I can't output anymore. That's a hard limit.
Okay.
So you really need to be mindful of these tokens.
So in other words, like it helps like if you're writing a prompt, like to be mindful, like how big it is, like not to consume too many tokens expressing yourself. If you are referring a class in like in your Agentforce Vibes context to get it, if it has like the if else statement we had, like it will use to load it, it will use more tokens other than like if we use the double like question marks. So those like will impact when we are working inside of Agentforce Vibes.
It will do, and that applies to all the advice so far will apply to any of the vibe coding, or even if you just copy and paste into ChatGPT or Claude or any of these kind of things. You've got to be mindful of the input. Now, a great example of getting the input wrong is if you get a AI to run a program, and let's say it's you're getting it to download a file, and it's got like a status bar appearing on the command line. What's actually being output to the input of the LLM is that line again and again and again with each change in each percentage. And you've just fed the AI a huge number of tokens.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas it's better to maybe just send it the message done so it knows it's done. And then that's just 4 characters. So rather than that progress bar again and again, you've just fed it 1 token.
Okay.
So there's a lot when it comes to input.
Okay. And there is two more questions I put down for you in the chat. One is how can we
Oh,
use
how can you
count?
count it?
Yeah.
Very with a great amount of difficulty. If you're using cursor, they've got a nice kind of wheel, and the idea is you kind of want to make sure you never go to about 50% on the wheel, so you can see how big the context is. Um, there are other tools. There's like Codex Monitor, which doesn't just do codex, it does a lot, which are like little tools you can have in your system bar and see what's happening. But generally, you'll get the feel for when things are low token because you start to notice the side effects. And we'll dive into this because there's three kind of sizes of model, and they each have their own side effects when you reach too many tokens. But generally, you just want to be mindful of token reduction and keeping tokens light.
Okay. And there
And the AI assuming Java at the moment, it could well be. Funny enough, Agentforce Vibes Gwen, which is the model they use when it's on when it goes to core, it's like a pro and a core model. Gwen very much kind of assumes you're using Java for things.
Mhm.
So it will come up with functions that only exist in Java and don't exist in Apex. But we'll be covering how you can kind of combat that coming up.
I mean, yeah, that's great. Yeah, no more questions at the moment. Thank you.
No, we're going to dive into context, and this is a kind of free-form discussion we're going to go into context on. Don't worry, again, the session for this will be shared, so you'll get the slides. I just wanted to kind of draw it out in case we've got any questions and we wanted to go through them. So this orange bit is our context. Fill it up with things, but once it's full, it will start deleting things or compressing them. So shedding detail is an easy way. So imagine we've got a couple of rules. We've written our rules, and our rule might be something like, I want all my variables to have underscores between each word. And you might have another rule, and the second rule might be, I want all of my variables to be named after Disney characters. Whatever your rule is, I'm not going to question it. Then you're going to write a prompt and say the prompt's quite lengthy. It might be create like an LWC component and things. You've now filled up the context to about 2/3. It needs a little bit of room itself in order to think and to do. So if I put that in, say, green here, we've got room to think. Now, it's got about that much room to think and delete tokens from. You've now filled your context. So let's say it created the LWC and you now needed to come back with some changes. What it's going to do behind the scenes is go, right, the previous prompt, I still keep hold of. So it still kept hold of that. The thinking will probably be shrunk down a little bit, just because for reasoning, it writes a lot of text. It then throws a lot of that away out of the context. So it's only keeping kind of the high level thoughts, not the detailed thoughts. Then you write a prompt and say your prompt's nice and long, saying fix the LWC. Well, you've already filled up the context. Most LLMs at the minute, most models, most things that you type into for vibe coding will want to aim to only have half filled. So it's going to go, right, you've overfilled this. I need to shrink things up. So it might go, I'm going to summarize some of your rules. Hopefully, it hasn't lost your rules entirely, but it might start now degrading some of your rules. That prompt that you entered earlier, well, I'm going to shrink that down. And I hope there wasn't something important you put in that prompt that wasn't in the rules that you want me to follow, because I might start forgetting some of that. The previous thinking has been shrunk, and now it's got your new prompt, but your new prompt's intact. So as you go along in this same context, if you now do another one and you go, oh, I need this to happen, again, your rules from before might start to shrink, might be lost. Your first prompt, I really hope there wasn't anything too important in there, because it's going to start forgetting more and more. It's going to go, the original thoughts that it had are probably going to go less. We've got that prompt and we've got the thinking. So you may have heard the kind of mantra that you want to create a new context in order to make things work, because the longer you have a context, the more you have in it, the worse it's going to operate, because it's got less and less room to do the thinking in, less and less free space to do the thinking, so it becomes worse with its results. And things like rules and your prompt instructions are going to decrease over time. There are ways around this, which we'll cover, but I just really wanted to impress on people. This is when people talk about context and context windows and things, this is what they're on about. Your prompt, you can find out how many input tokens it is for a model using a tokenizer. You can figure out how many tokens your rules are. You can figure out how many tokens the prompt is. For the thinking, you'd kind of need to copy and paste that reasoning, the text when it's reasoning, that bit out. It's very hard to get a good guide on the thinking space, but if you're using something like Cursor where you can see it in real time, you can figure out how much space is left out for that given model. And I think we're going to pause here because I'm expecting there's going to be a fair few questions to get through this.
So one question, like, is the vibe coding tools will be like caring more about the number of tokens or the size of the context window, or both together? Like, what's the measuring, like when also we are comparing models together?
The size of the context window is in tokens. So the measure is number of tokens
Mm-hmm.
for a context window. There are system prompts behind the scenes. So they're prompts that you can't control, that are being put in by the teams that are providing you these vibe coding tools. And you may get hints of them. So if you ask an agent to do a lot of work, it might go something like, due to the time constraints. You've not set any time constraints, but the system prompt, the bit you can't get to, has time constraints. It's trying to keep the amount of work you're doing to around 2 minutes or less is quite common. In bigger models, they'll set it to 5 minutes, then 10 minutes, and so on and so forth. But the idea is they want to keep your work short, and it might lose details. So if you ask it to port some code, to take some code from one system and move it to another, and maybe move all the unit tests, it might go, yeah, I've completed it. And then you go and look and half the unit tests are missing, or it's missed out work, or it's tried to not do everything. That's really common. And that's because of these whether it's system context it's trying to reduce, or whether it's the runtime it's trying to reduce. The context reduction stuff, so reducing the amount that's in here, is generally not a billing issue. If it's them reducing the amount of time you get, that's because they're trying to save costs. If it's the amount of context, generally this orange bit is the same for every customer, same for every run. But what they're trying to do is help you by giving enough room for it to think. So Cursor will do something when you get to this point and go, right, oh, Claude will, I'm compressing. So all it's going to do is shrink stuff up even more, as tight as it can, and then go, right, I'm going to try and keep it below 50% used before any prompts in order to give enough room to think. So when they've got limits to do with context, they're trying to help you. When it's limits to do with other things like number of callouts, amount of time, that's to save them money. Okay, and in your context window, does everything represent input tokens here? Yes, everything blue and pink represent input tokens. Green is kind of the context only tokens, the thinking tokens. So they become input tokens once it's thought and it's ready for the next prompt. So it's kind of like its own input is the result of what it's just done. Why is it in Agentforce Vibes it's recommended to create a new task? Because what happens when you do a new task is if I shrink these over quickly, if we got to this point here, like that third stage, what it's going to do instead when you create a new task is go, right, my new task is that. I've now got a free context and you can type your prompt and it's like you're back to square one. So creating a new task is creating a new context. Um, Agentforce Vibes doesn't really have an explicit compaction mode for tasks at the moment. That's subject to change. That they need to speak to the team on that one. But there isn't really anything where it pauses and goes, I'm compacting your history. What it does is instead is what they call context pressure. The other fun term we like is called catastrophic forgetting, which is basically it goes, oh, I'm full. What I'm going to do is just forget some of your roles. Oh no, I'm full. I'm just going to start shrinking things up. So what we've seen here is that kind of pressure from the bottom, and it will start forgetting things. It will start grouping stuff together in memory. And that's kind of how it all syncs together. So, oh, you do have compacting already. My bad, I've not seen that yet. That compacting does, yeah, would do it. It's just basically taking your context and shrinking it up. Thank you, Sally. I hadn't realized that. Cool.
And there is another question I was just putting for you in the chat. Like, if now, as a developer or someone working on Salesforce, like you may have a prompt that will result in Apex class, LWC component test classes. Would that make sense then? Like, we split them into a task only to create the LWC, then another task to create Apex, a third task to create test classes, or we create a prompt that does everything for us.
It's better to have different tasks for that because of the size of model
Hmm.
of Agentforce Vibes. That's a specific Agentforce Vibes and where it is right now answer. Um, if we had a larger model, you can get away with putting it together, and there's actually some advantages putting that together
Okay.
into one. Because we've got such a tiny model, even the Pro model is like GPT-5, which is a tiny model. Um, you don't have that much context to play with. And also, if you're using Agentforce Vibes, you're going to be using the MCP server, which we'll get to in a bit. But it's you'll even want to tune your configuration for each task rather than just having the same configuration per task.
Okay.
So you
And,
may want
and
to go for
yeah,
it.
sorry. So for the compact task, like the option that I saw on Agentforce 5, like I didn't use it myself, but like, do you expect it like it's summarizing everything, like the thinking, the rules, the prompts we have, summarizing them and compacting them, or do you
That's
expect
what
it
it's
like to
doing
be
basically. It's looking at what can I group together? What are those token IDs that are the same? How can I reduce down the number of thoughts? And that's like going from step one to step three, where these rules, these prompts, these things, they're just getting shrunk down and shrunk down. And fine detail is being lost. Sometimes that's okay. Sometimes that's the rule you really didn't want to lose.
Okay. So it's a good option to have, but sometimes it can re like cause issues or can be a risk on its own.
Yeah. And if you're perfect, and no one's perfect, by the
Hmm.
way, what
Definitely.
you would do is never fill the context. You'd never go above 100% and need this compaction. But every one of us is just one prompt away from this working, and we'll just type it in and hit compaction and things like that. So really don't punish yourself. There's a lot of explanatory things. Chances are it's not lost that bit of rule or that bit of prompt that you wanted from earlier. But if you keep doing that, if you keep hitting that boundary, you will eventually lose stuff.
Okay. And I put in the chat like a screenshot as well from Agentforce Vibes. It shows the percentage, like what's the percentage we used, for example, in the
I
context or
don't think that's a percentage. Isn't that 50 case? That's the number of tokens. So you can actually see the number of tokens in real time.
okay. It shows a percentage for the context window and the token usage as well.
Oh, excellent. Both. Perfect.
Yeah. And
Cool.
we can click on it, it shows more details.
Excellent. Yeah. So yeah, I think the 50K it's highlighting there is basically like the will be the number of tokens. So you can actually see that token count. That because they like hiding as much detail as possible. Normally, not Agentforce vibes, but vibe coding tools like to hide more and more detail. Some of that's harder to see with other models and with other tools. So you may need third-party tools to see those details. But that's really good that the team's showing you the number of tokens there. Cool. So we've looked at tokens. We've looked at the context window. We're going to dive now into the model size. With the model size discussion, it always seems really complicated to begin with, but we're going to get through this, team. Okay. So I want to show you some scary graphs, and then we're going to go for a lot lighter mood. Okay. So scary graphs time. There's only three of them, but it's important. So, scary graph number one. This is looking at AIs and what can they achieve 80% of the time. We've got a vertical axes where we're looking at how long a task would take a human to do. We're looking at across the x-axis when these models were released, and then very faint in grey, and it may not come up very well on the screen share, I'm afraid. You've got the standard deviation, so you can see when the things are hitting these target points along the way. So we can see things like finding a fact on the web. Well, some models were starting to be able to find facts accurately 80% of the time, starting just before 2025, so late 2024. Some were getting close, but not quite there. And you can see the different models and when they're available. Implement a dictionary attack, so like a brute force attack, but using words from a dictionary for scanning through webs, like passwords. Implementing a simple web server, so creating a web server. And remember, this is in a single prompt. So you type a prompt and it's delivered the result at the end. And training a classifier. So a classifier can identify one thing compared to another, that kind of thing. And you can see these are new capabilities, but the big bit, rather than the individual tasks, is how long it would take a human versus how much can be done in a single prompt. So not multiple prompts in a big context, one prompt, one result. And you can see what models are capable. It doesn't say how long that prompt takes to run, but you can see the progress across time. And we've got a mix of models as well. These are looking at mostly medium to large models. Then we got the scary one coming up at the moment. which is looking at attacks that are possible. So these are people creating viruses, malware, that kind of thing. And this looks at 50% of the time them being successful. And again, we can see when you're trying to find these exploits, these vulnerabilities, these would take hours for a human. They're now a single prompt for an AI. So security becomes really important nowadays, especially with vibe coding and especially anything near production or with customer sensitive data. Because whilst the tools are getting better at building stuff quickly, the rate that the bad actors can find exploits and security vulnerabilities has grown far faster. And again, these are medium to large models. Then the final graph, and we'll take a pause because I think this is going to take a long time to digest this one. We've got a few different axes being shown at the same time. So, given a complicated software task, so asking the AI to implement a piece of software, and this is not just one prompt, this can be many prompts, we want it to build a complex piece of software. How close to any of these models get is the x-axis. So we've got Llama in the low 60% that they've completed. So imagine like a unit tests. How many unit tests pass? All the way up to Opus 4.5 with thinking, with reasoning being the closest. But that's not the only detail being shown. You've got the cognitive complexity. So how hard is it for a human to understand the code that's been written on the y-axis? And you've got the number of lines of code in each bubble. That's a lot of information at once. We're going to go back through this slowly, but I'd quite like to hear some questions and us to go back through this. Okay.
Uh, I added for them for you. If you can just read them, Beach,
Yeah,
so we'll be
absolutely. Yeah.
straightforward. Yeah.
So why is IBM Watson not on the graph? Because they used a prompt to diagnose a rare disease. That's a good question. And there are a lot of benefits with IBM Watson in research and discovery. One of the best people to follow online. Sol, she worked on IBM Watson to begin with. The reason is I'm using the data I've got access to, and a lot of IBM's data is not publicly accessible or not publicly compared. We can probably do a deep dive where we're looking at that kind of thing, but that's going to take me hours to research. And to be honest, I don't care that much because I don't have access to IBM Watson. So you're perfectly right. It's a very good question. I'm not doing that level of research unless IBM give me access to Watson. IBM, if you're listening, I'd love it. That's where I am right now. But good question. Um, can you summarize to us in easier language the results of the graph? Okay. This third one we're going to discuss in more detail, but I'm just going to go back to the first one. What I'm trying to impart on you is that the amount of time it takes a human to do a job versus which AIs can do that same job in just one prompt. Remember when we were looking at the context, those pink bits? Those are your prompts that you're putting in. So you type one instruction and it delivers it 80% of the time. So 4 times out of 5, if you enter a prompt and press enter, it can deliver a task that would have taken a human 45 minutes to do. And all you've done is typed in and pressed enter. That's where we are right now. So something that would take you 45 minutes to do just takes you writing a sentence or two and pressing enter.
So this one shows how AI models are helping to achieve tasks faster if we use it properly.
That's it. It
Benchmark.
doesn't mean that they're capable of all tasks and things like that. It's just roughly where they are because you can't really guide anything. But the big reason for showing this is the second one, the amount of time it would take an attacker, a hacker, someone writing malware, someone trying to break into your system, someone trying to steal your customer data. What would have taken them back then, we were looking at 45 minutes. Now we're looking at something that would have taken an attacker 7 hours is now possible in one prompt. So the level of security you need to be thinking about grows heavily. And it's why with vibe coding, you're going to see a lot more exploits, a lot more vulnerabilities now, because that bit is so much easier than creating things that are good and easy for humans to use. So it's just a real warning of the security landscape for 2026 and the downsides of vibe coding as well as the positives. And it might be with vibe coding, they put in some system prompts to stop you being able to do things, certainly around writing malware. So you might hit some of those as false positives, and the reason is because it's so dangerous right now. So that's kind of what I wanted to show you, the amount of time saved and the amount in a single prompt, because it's thinking about, input tokens, context, trying to keep things minimal. So it's how much one prompt can do. Which model would you recommend mostly for vibe coding, especially for Salesforce? That's cheating. We'll get to that in the end, and the answer is multiple. Okay, not clear on those graphs how to map to model size. Yep, that's intentional. I'm not showing model size. Um, these all that I'm showing you here are a mix between small, medium, and large. For those last two graphs, I'm only showing you medium and large. We're going to be discussing model size in the next section, well, in this section in a sec, but it's intentional. These graphs are not showing you model size. That's not what we're trying to impart yet. Is the model size related to window context number of tokens? Yes, it is. Not every vendor operates the same. So a large model for one vendor might be a medium model for the next. So you can only really think about large, small, and medium to do with the same series from the same vendor. So GPT might have an O4 Mini, an O4, and a O4 Pro, for instance, that kind of thing. You might just have a small, medium, and they might mix their numbers between them. But essentially, you'll look at one vendor in order to know the small, medium, and large, or you'll look at them holistically and make your own judgment over what's a small, a medium, or a large model. I'm impressed by the graphics, but how well were they doing these tasks? Well, that was the percentage shows you how well they're doing, basically. Are they achieving it or not? So for the tasks that we're looking at that are on the positive side, they're achieving them 80% of the time for those 45-minute tasks, so 4 times out of 5. For the attacking ones, 50%, but to be fair, 50% is, you know, coin toss whether they're going to break in or not. It's a lot more risk going on it. They only have to be lucky once, you have to be lucky every time. And for here, you've got a axes along the x-axis for how well they did, how much of the functionality did they achieve. Do. So if security is at risk with AI, how do we feel about Agentforce Vibes or other tools or the trust layer of Agentforce? I'm probably not going to go on record on my feeling of the trust layer for Agentforce, so I'm going to leave that aside. However, how do we feel about Agentforce Vibes or other tools? They're tools. They're great. Your hammer can put up pictures, paintings, artwork. It can also put a hole in your window. It's a matter of using the right tool for the right job and being aware of the positives and the downsides. Um, you wouldn't let your kids play with fire, but you're going to use it for cooking. It's a matter of making sure you've got the right tools in the right hands. You wouldn't want an admin vibe coding in production that has no clue behind the code. And you'd want to make sure that if you've got a new solution that you've built, that you've aided with vibe coding, that you've got a peer review from another human and that you've thought about security constraints and how you can build things around that security. There's a lot of upcoming projects around this area as well to help people. But what you don't want to do is leave it 100% to the vibe coding and then hit publish and make it public, especially with customer details or financial records or anything like that. You want to still have those human in the loop security controls and security assessments and to allow enough time budget for those. Is thinking a model in ChatGPT? It takes longer to use but gets better results. So it depends. Thinking is a rebranded version of reasoning. And it's a double-edged sword. So you can allow more thinking time but it can also figure out a solution early on and talk itself out of it. A good example was Grok. Grok before New Year, so any time in 2025 towards the end, was amazing because it didn't really think. You could tell it something and it would just do it. It wouldn't question it. It wouldn't wait around. It wouldn't pause. It wouldn't talk itself out of it. It wouldn't challenge you. It would just do whatever you wanted. Grok in 2026 spends a lot of time thinking and reasoning and sometimes arguing with you and not doing what you wanted it to do. So there's pros and cons with thinking and reasoning. It's not a this is better. It takes more time, it takes more tokens, and you've got to balance it. You've really got to know the model when it comes to thinking and reasoning. You might get lucky, it might be fine for what you're using, but there's a bit of trial and error, a bit of experimentation, and sometimes you really do not want reasoning because it will talk itself out of a solution. Um, what is the purpose of the third graph? Okay, I will be coming to that in a sec. I just want to answer the last question, then we're going to go into it. Plan and deep plan will consume more tokens than act straight away in Agentforce Vibes. Yes. My argument is, do you really want to plan and deep plan in Agentforce Vibes given the size of model? And we'll discuss this in a little bit coming up. I don't think they're great models for doing that in, but we'll look at that in a sec. Okay, so back to this graph. What I'm really trying to show you here is, let's say we've got the winner, the one that came closest to the solution, Opus 4.5 with thinking. In order to do that, it's one of the lower complexities, but it needed 639,000 lines of code to achieve that solution. So whilst it's low in complexity, that's still a lot of code. That's over 500,000 lines of code you've now got in your source code repo as a result. If we compare it to something like GPT 5.2, GPT 5.2 didn't come as close. It's way more complex, so it's higher on that chart, and it needed around 50% more lines of code to achieve that. So you probably don't want that in your code base. When you get to large projects of software, you may want to use a smaller model than Opus that's more focused on being able to achieve software development. So, for instance, Claude Sonnet with thinking achieved almost the same as Opus, not that far in terms of percent, but with only two-thirds the tokens, only two-thirds the lines of code, 400,000 lines of code compared to 600,000 lines of code, and achieving practically the same level of complexity. The difference between Claude Sonnet thinking and without reasoning is a distance of about 5% in achieving it for this, and only a few lower lines for the lesser percent. So you can see from here that, hey, if I've got a large code base, whilst Opus by all means came closest from the prompting, you may not pick that because of the verbosity of code, because the number of lines that come out of it. And there's a reason behind that. Agentforce Vibes is using Chat GPT 5, so should we consider another tool based on Graph 3? This is the question. You may not want to use Agentforce Vibes is very good for programming, but you might not want to use it for planning or the text that you put into your plans. And we're about to go into this into more detail. So this is where we're at. We might want to consider other models. In our household, I need to explain things to my other half sometimes because they're curious. They want to know what's happening. And she loves animals. So whether it's containers, virtualization, microservices, or AI, I like to use birds to explain things. Just because there's small ones, there's large ones, they interact differently, and it allows me to articulate some of these plans. So When we're talking about a large model, an Opus or a GPT 5.2, those big hitters on that right-hand side of the graph, I'm going to call them big birds. That's what we're dealing with. Then we've got Sonnet. You know that one that came to around 400,000 lines, was almost as accurate and had that lower complexity. I call those the mother birds. They're good leaders, they're good planners on here. And then we've got the cheapy cheaps, the workers. So Agentforce Vibes, the models it uses are like cheapy cheaps, we call them, just like little birds. You've got things like Grok as well, is pretty much a cheapy cheap, a little bird for doing things. And you've got things like GPT-5, Gwen, both have used Agentforce Vibes. They're just the little birds on the right-hand side. So let's focus first on the cheapy cheaps, what you can do with Agentforce Vibes. So they're really good at reading text quickly. Small models can go through text quickly, can write text quickly, but they only remember a little bit. So when you do something like plan mode, they're reading through. When you do deep plan mode, you're still using a little bird here, but you're just force feeding it to read page after page after page after page. But it's such a small model, it forgets most of the stuff when it gets to the end. So even with deep planning, where you've forced it to read all of the source code, all of your metadata, it's still going to have forgotten the things and put it through. So the advantage, though, and why you really want small models is that quickness, that rapidity, that low latency when you're entering text and things, and the ability to read huge amounts. If you give huge amounts of text to a larger model, most of them will go, no, that's above my limit. Whereas you can feed large amounts of text into a smaller model and it'll just churn through it with real rapidity. One of the other effects when you get to a small model, a cheap, is it doesn't know often what good looks like. It doesn't have that large brain, that um, complex network of information to know good from bad at times. So you want to have a third-party tooling. You want a tool it can call to go, is this good? Isn't this good? And then if it isn't good, what's wrong? Tell me what's wrong. Right, I'll go and fix that. So it left to their own, without instructions, without tools, without any quality control stuff, you're going to end up with it just going, I've completed the task. Isn't everything great? And you look at it and it really isn't. And a lot of people have hit this with Agentforce Vibes to begin with. And it's a matter of just understanding the size of the tool and the capabilities and when you need to bring in extra tooling. We're going to get into the topic of skills, which exposes sub-agents and stuff. But a good way of thinking about it is, because they're small and they can only do so much. I think one of the questions earlier came up: should we have a task for an LWC, a task for Apex, a task for the data model? It's that kind of thinking. You may want one GPT, one small model doing each of those tasks to build up your whole complete goal. So you may not just want one on its own and keep adding to the prompt, because you're going to get bad results. But having separate ones doing it can tackle those larger jobs. Also, if you ask it to do too much, it will just avoid doing anything. I've seen people just having arguments with the prompt going, can you stop summarizing and just do the task? Or earlier when we were talking about it saying, oh, due to time constraints, I'm not going to do it. Or it just leaves half the task that you've asked it to do and just gone, yeah, everything's good. So you really need to think about how big a task you're giving one of these per prompt. And there's tools and techniques which we'll get to in a separate session, but you really want to be mindful to not ask too much. You can give them specialist skills, like rules that say, hey, you're an LWC designer. These are your tools for LWC design. Go do it. And you can give them specialist skills. But what happens when you give them specialist skills, when you give them the rules? Anytime you add rules, you make it worse at generic tasks. So the more it specializes, the worse it is as a generalist. There's always a trade-off with these models. So especially with the smaller models, with the larger models, they can take it. With the smaller models, they really can't. The more you specialize, the more rules, the more you put on them, the worse they are at just knowing the general day-to-day of how to do things. So you want to have a mix potentially of generalist and specialist and really think about it. So those are the small models. That's what you're dealing with Agentforce Vibes. We're about to go into medium-sized models, but are there any kind of questions about these smaller models?
There is one, I left it for you in the chat.
Okay, apologies. Yeah. So, can you architect Salesforce? Can they use Agentforce Vibes to build the structure of an org and relational data model? Yes, you can get Agentforce Vibes to build the structure of an org and data model with relationships. So my experience of this, and there's some tools which we'll be covering in separate session on here. It doesn't even know the data model of Salesforce. There's I don't know if this is the spring release, but certainly the winter release. There's 1,640 standard objects. And the reason I know that is because I used a tool to be able to extract all of that detail and write it and allow Agentforce Vibes to access it so it knew what the models were, let alone anything live where it's having to use API calls to get it, either via an MCP, which we'll cover in a bit, or a script or anything. So in order to even build things, it needs to know what's there and needs to make decisions sometimes on whether to reuse an existing one or not. So I'm practicing for my CTA. A lot of that is deciding, do you make a new object? Do you reuse an existing one? And it's not always transparent. So sometimes you want a little bit more context if you're asking questions. So for Agentforce Vibes, which is a small model, it's not going to have those balanced debates with you. You need a probably a large model for that one, but it can make decisions based on what you're asking. So it can go, is there a field that already exists that I can use for this on an object that makes sense, or do I need to make a new one? That it can figure out. What it can't figure out is when you shouldn't use the standard object, the standard fields, and should make your own. So with the architect bit, there's a little bit of to and sway there. Um, Agentforce Vibes is a small model. How to give it medium or large? Well, the team are working on it, is all I can say for that. If they release a medium or large one, great. Otherwise, you need to look at other tooling, other services in order to use a medium or large model, then break down the tasks and provide it to Agentforce Vibes. We're about to go into medium models, so this is a good segue. So, a medium model, what we call the motherbird, and they're natural leaders. So they don't lose focus. With these little cheapy cheaps, you're typing things, they're just going to go, oh, I've forgotten this, I've forgotten that bit of context. When you get to medium models, they tend to not do that as much. They tend to keep on point and to remember rules, remember tasks. If you put a prompt in at the beginning, the chances are several prompts on, it will still remember what its main task is. You'll see it do things like put titles in and stuff. They're really good natural leaders. But because of that, they know what they don't know. So they know how to delegate, how to use rules, how to look up external documentation if it's small enough. And they know how to organize. So you can ask a motherbird to do those plans. When we talk about plans and deep plans, for plans, I really prefer using a motherbird, like a medium-sized model. Something like Sonnet, which we saw from the graphs, did a really good job. That's a great use for a medium-sized model. So if you're creating a plan, which will then be executed by smaller models, I would always create the plan in a medium-sized model. And it helps keep, size and complexity in check, which we were discussing. So I normally create a markdown file, a MD file called plan.md at the beginning of every project. And I'll get Sonnet or a medium-sized model like Sonnet to create that plan. That plan will then be executed by small models to build it out. You can get a medium-sized model to write code, but it's slower and it costs money, a lot more money. a lot more. The bigger the model, the more you're paying for the same number of tokens. And it's a real waste in terms of ecology, the amount of power you're using in some data warehouse. It's not great. So tend to use smaller models for actually writing the code and Motherbird's medium-sized models for planning. And with Agentforce Vibes, you do not have a choice of a medium-sized model. You might think Pro's a medium-sized model. It's actually what most people would class as a small model because it's just GPT-5. Um, I'm using the fflib design pattern in my code. Cool, the enterprise one. I gave a prompt to generate code using fflib or sock design pattern, but Agentforce generated code in Singleton instead. Yes. Agentforce code doesn't code according to the design pattern. Correct. These are things you need to build your own rules in for it to understand. It doesn't understand it outside of the box. It doesn't even understand the functions that are available in Apex outside of the box right now. These are things the teams are working on and stuff. So this video will probably age poorly on YouTube. Well, I really hope it does. But for now, you need to provide those details to those models. There are smaller models out there that already know Apex. But even standard Apex, let alone third-party packages and third-party code, it really doesn't know, and you need to kind of provide that information, that context to it. I'm using rules at the moment for that. Can a company create its own model Agentforce Vibes to adapt? At the minute, as far as I'm aware, you can't. But if you wanted that same kind of security where you're running things locally, if I look at Agentforce Vibes, I'm getting maybe 20, 30 tokens a second output. If I run something called LM Studio, and sorry, Sally, I'll need to give you a link to this, locally on my MacBook, I've just got like a MacBook M4 Pro. I'm getting maybe 300 tokens a second running that same Gwen model. So if I look at Gwen and I look at Gwen on Agentforce Vibes, I'm getting maybe 20, 30 tokens. If I'm running it locally, I'm getting like 300 tokens. Same model, same rules can run, same everything. So, but that's just using a third-party tool called LM Studio to do it. I don't have GPT-5 on my MacBook, and I'm not paying OpenAI to run that, so I can't talk about the Pro model, but at least the core model, you can run that locally and a lot faster. And there's GPT OSS, which you can run locally, which is an in between Pro and core model size. Can we do an example together of using a large model, then a medium, and finally Agentforce Vibes? Yes, that's what the second session will be focusing on. So we'll definitely be doing that, but not for this session. This session, I just want to get the groundworks because that means for the second session, we could go quickly and go boom, 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 this in practice. Can you recommend at the end a model for large, model for medium to use with Agentforce Vibes? I can do that right now. I really, really like there's three big models to pick from. In my opinion, there are others, but I really like Opus for code, but for reviewing code and reviewing libraries. And we'll cover this in a sec, but actually I'll flick to it now. Opus or Big Bird, I really love for taking messy thoughts, messy ideas, big reams of documentation. So you might crawl an entire site of documentation and feed it to Opus and just turn it into small, concise notes for a human, for an LLM to understand. So that's Opus. You've got Gemini Pro, and the Pro is important. Gemini Pro allows you to come up with really good artistic ideas. It's very good for the creative side of things, visuals, and how to put things together. With any of these models, it's as good as the prompt and as good as the source material. So with Gemini Pro, you'll have a certain set of templates built in and its design skill that it uses. But the more source material you can give it that guides it towards what you want, the better. So you've got Gemini Pro for creative. You've got Opus for kind of text and boring things. Then you've got GPT 5.2, which is really good for figuring out operational things. business processes. How do humans think? How do humans operate? What's going to work for a logistics business? That kind of thing. So your core logic, you might want to put through. And all of these, I would only use Opus or GPT 5.2 Pro or Gemini Pro to take big ideas, big messy data, and turn it into small, concise, manageable units of information. So I've got a project called Agent Docs, which has taken a huge amount of documentation and shrunk it down to a very low token amount of information that a human can read or an agent can read that tells you exactly the same thing as that long text, but has just shrunk it down. So I wouldn't get it to write code, I wouldn't get it to create a plan, but I'd get it to shrink that information. Whereas if we're looking at a motherbird, like a medium sized model, you can feed it those output documents from a large model and which are now low token and get it to write a plan based on them. So we've got the big model, which can take big messy text and stuff and shrink it down into something concise. We've got a motherbird which can read all these concise things and come up with a plan. Then you've got the small models which can read the plan as well as refer to these low token documents, these low token pieces. So all three go together.
And Beach, like the question was, like you mentioned three big ones for the medium. Which like models you would be recommending?
I really like at the minute Sonnet, and I've not found a better tool than a better medium-sized model than Sonnet for that. Um, for any task.
And
Now,
the rest of the question was wondering uh like if they use the large or the medium you were referring to, and with Agentforce Vibes, does that require a subscription, extra cost to run each of those, or they are free?
it requires a subscription. So you can go to Claude, where you'll have access to Opus and Sonnet, and that's $20 a month. You can go all the way up to like $200 a month. You've got Cursor, where it's the same, like 200 up to, say 20 up to 200 per month for doing those. Or you've got solutions like T3 Chat, which let you pick from any model, and that's $8 a month. And generally, if you I use T3 Chat personally. Um, I also have Cursor, I also have Claude, but if I'm doing something for Agentforce Vibes, I just use T3 Chat. And for the number of tokens, that seems $8 a month seems to cover me all the costs, what I need to do. But it's horses for courses. There's other solutions available. There are other models. I'd encourage you to look. If you wanted to be free, DeepSeek is a good example of a medium-sized model. So I prefer Sonnet, but DeepSeek is a good alternative if you're after a free model. Which one are we implementing business requirements and want output into Apex? Okay, so for business requirements, I'd go for GPT 5.2. That's business operations, business requirements. For Apex, LWC, well, what I would do is take the manuals for the Apex or LWC you want, feed it into Opus, and then take the output of that and use a small model to actually build it, and use a mid-size model to plan how to build it. I've got a project called Agent Docs, which has already got all the LWC stuff shrunk down for you already. So you can just take that and use it. Again, I'll share the link for this, but it allows you to then just get going with LWC. I'm working on the Apex one. It's not available yet, but it'll be coming. And that's just take those big manuals, shrink them down in Opus, give it to a medium-sized model to plan, and then the little models can refer to them to build it out. Gemini, I'd use a Gemini Pro. I would use for figuring out how you want a user interface to work. So user interface, design, that kind of thing. It's great at. And Opus, yeah, shrinks it down. And then for the actual mini models, there's a lot we can choose from, but we'll cover that in a sec. So these big Opus ones, these big GPT 5.2, They take forever to run as well, and they're normally trained on outside information. So they'll be outdated by the time you're using them. And generally, with these large models, they prefer that you don't have real time access to the internet. Medium-sized models will normally have real-time access. They'll try and reduce the amount that you can actually talk to the outside internet for these large models. So you end up copy and pasting information in and things like that. Um, and they're very slow. When GPT 5.2 came out, people were horrified with how long it was taking to respond. They had to roll out an emergency thing where people were suddenly on GPT-5 because they were typing a message and it was 20, 30, 40 seconds and they're not getting a response. And people just think the website's broken. So they had to reverse that and go, we're going to give you the smaller, stupider model just so you can get responses quickly. And even with Gemini, you've got Gemini Flash, Gemini Instant, Gemini Pro. They're different model sizes for different levels of response. There's nothing faster than a smaller model. There's nothing faster at reading, writing, answering than a smaller model. Things like reasoning and thinking just add delay and it might talk itself out of doing things. So you really want to be thinking about, do I need a big, a medium, or a small? Bigs just take a lot of information and compress it down, is my personal view on where you're going to get a lot of utility out of them. Medium for creating these plans, where you can do plan, deep plan, mid-size model, where it makes a lot of sense, and then small ones for doing your actual work. And they're going to be cheap, they're going to be quick. Cool. Right. That was a lot, I appreciate, but that's the largest section. Everything gets easier from here. So we're going to look at some traits, some problems when you're dealing with smaller models. If you see your smaller model reaching for these tools, things like grep, sed, tail, git, that normally indicates you're doing something wrong with the small model. It's a good telltale sign. Grep looks at, say, a long amount of text and allows you to search for a word and just bring back those lines that match that word or that string or that however much text. So that's telling you that the output from your command line or the output from your text or whatever you're dealing with is too long. That model is having trouble with the amount of input tokens coming into it. There's too much noise and not enough signal. So if you can write scripts that agents can use, this is a good indication that you probably want a script, whether that's a wrapper around an existing program. So if you've got a program that gives you lots of lines of output, but you only need a few, you might want to write a program that calls that other program and just reduces the text for the AI. You don't want these AI models figuring out what text it does and doesn't want, because that's tokens at that point. It's already input tokens. You want to filter the input tokens before the AI model starts eating them. The same with tail. Tail means it only cares about the end result at the very end. That message like done, okay, good, or 5 out of 10 records were completed. Again, you should be using a wrapper or a script or something to just output only the information the AI model needs. You're giving it too much information if you start it seeing using tail or grep. Sed as well. Sed's double-edged, so sed might be find and replace text. Well, you shouldn't be using an AI model to find and replace text. You've got traditional tools that don't rely on AI to do that. You might have things like your code styling rules is a good one where you'll start to see sed come in. And it's like, right, your code style, you can use tools like Prettier that don't consume tokens, that run instantly on your computer, that don't need to go up to the cloud, get processed, and come all the way back down and potentially misinterpreted. You should be using tools like Prettier and customizing those rules to make the code look like you want. If you're writing rules for code style, that's generally a bad idea nowadays because you can use tools to do the same. And when it's reached for tools like Git, that's a good sign that you're asking it to do too much in the same context. Because if it's now having to reach for Git, well, it means it's probably having to restore files or commit files. And committing files should be the end of the context, you know. A Git should be the smallest amount of changes. Like a Git commit should be the smallest amount of changes. If it's reaching for Git to restore files, it's made mistakes. It's probably gone too far and you're overreaching for that one commit message. Or if it's making commits itself, that should be your responsibility, ideally. You should be breaking up these tasks and thinking about it or structuring it in a plan. We got questions. We used DeepSeek in a sprint and it was stuck, never got the answer. Maybe too many people asking the prompt at the same time. Is people asking prompt? Well, with DeepSeek, you can run the DeepSeek locally. That's one of the advantages. You can take a laptop and run it on. So you don't need to use the hosted version. There's going to be compliance issues a lot of the time if you're using their version on the cloud because of links to China, run and things. So I'm not aware of many people using it for vibe coding, running them, using their site, their services, but you can download the model and just run it on your machine. You can get something like a Mac Studio, put it in a server rack for under £1,000 that will run these models perfectly and a lot faster than a lot of these online services. Next question. Usually when using Agentforce Vibes, it will just build the logic we asked for. How can we tell if it uses grep, sed, or tail? You've got it'll show a command console, a terminal at the bottom, and you can see what commands it's running in real time. A lot of the time, you'll end up babysitting vibe coding to begin with, so you're just sat there watching it. As you progress, you'll learn how to build these tools, these rules, and then it's quite common for you to have like 5 cursor windows open at a time or multiple vibe coding sessions with Agentforce Vibes open in different windows doing different things. So you'll learn tools, and this is one of the things I really want to cover in the next session, will be how you can string things together as a programmer using that developer mindset. So you can leave a bunch of work running overnight and come back in the morning and it's finished, rather than having to sit and babysit it for hours. But to begin with, you're going to need to babysit it. You're going to need to see which commands it's running. Um, Agentforce Vibes uses an MPC server, sorry, MCP server, so you'll see less of this happening. But if you're using Cursor for the first time, you'll probably see a lot of these commands firing. And it just means your tooling could be improved. So an example of a couple of tools. One, so this is a tool I launched just because vibe coding was struggling, where I wanted certain code styles that weren't available with the default. If you're using a Salesforce project, you'll probably have prettier plugin Apex enabled and not even realize it. A lot of people had never heard of it, but they're using it on their project when they commit code. And it does things like format stuff. I wanted formatting to be a bit different. I wanted things to be the correct case, like uppercase, lowercase. I wanted lists to be on their own lines and stuff. So I just created a extension to the existing plugin, not a fork, just an extension that did the formatting that I wanted. So uppercase, lowercase, I wanted things like Apex Doc, which is the new documenting standard, to have it all nicely formatted inside, that kind of thing. So this is one of my projects, and it just means I don't need to get an LLM to do that. I don't need to waste tokens. An LLM can output code any way it likes. Don't care. It'll get reformatted correctly. Cool. Yeah. Then another tool, just as an example. I like to make tools that work well for humans as well as AI. So this is a little bit verbose, like a little bit too much more information than for a pure LLM, but it's a lot more concise than an LLM would normally get. And this is a tool when you're creating rules. So if you've ever used Code Analyzer or you've ever noticed like that problems tab in VS Code, all of them come from Code Analyzer. If you make your own rules, Agentforce Vibes picks up on it and goes, "Oh, I've made a mistake," you know. So if you can codify what mistakes are, Agentforce Vibes can learn and use those as rules. So even though it's a small model, you can go, "That's bad code." that's a problem, and it goes, oh no, I've made a mistake, I'll need to correct that. If you don't have tools that tell it where the problems are, it will just keep changing things randomly and never actually solving the problem. You might have seen that with Agentforce Vibes, where you tell it there's a bug, it won't deploy, and it just keeps changing stuff that makes no difference back and forth, and never getting anywhere. If you can take it directly to the source of the problem, it can then fix the problem, but you need to highlight it. You need to explain where that issue is. So this is for the rules that are created. And one of the things, there's a format called toon, token oriented notation, which is like JSON, JSON format, but it's shrunk down to reduce the amount of tokens you use. So a lot of the tools like the Salesforce command line, they have an option where you can change the format to JSON. Then you can convert JSON to toon, and that now becomes the smallest number of tokens to convey that same information to an LLM. So it's a great way to reduce the amount of information, reduce the amount of noise, increase the amount of signal that an LLM receives from a command line if you can get the output into JSON format. And you can string these together as scripts. So that's quite an advanced topic, but it's just a matter of there's tools out there. And what I'm really trying to get to is don't ask an LLM to do what you can do with a tool. Reduce the amount of complexity needed so it can see when a problem exists and where that problem exists. It will not find a problem unless it's pointed out to them clearly, and try to reduce the amount of tokens whilst conveying that same information. Okay, can be executed whilst Agentforce is implementing, or do we run them manually? Both. You can create a rule that says run them. Normally it finishes a prompt before the next prompt picks up on any errors and mistakes. But you can write a rule that says before you finish, before you give me a summary, run these tools. So within that one prompt, it can do its work, run the tool, go, oh, there's a mistake, and carry on doing it. So it's like, how do you extend the length of a prompt? Well, the runtime of that one prompt is by having a rule that says before you say code's complete, you needed to have passed Prettier, you needed to have done run code analyzer. Can we see Toon in action and how to use it from Agentforce Vibes? We can. We'll go through that in the second session on here. Basically, there's a command line tool, and you're just going to take JSON output. So I'll show you some of the scripts. I'm working on a wrapper for general purpose, but that's not available yet. I don't think that'll probably be available even for the second session. But it's just a command line where you input JSON, it outputs Toon. I'm going to regret this, I know, but if I go into Toon on GitHub, they'll have a great example on the first page. Da, da, da. There's also Apex Toon as well. So if you're running on Apex Toon, source code product, there we are. So there's a whole Apex library already, if you want to do it within there. And if I take, this is JSON, that's Toon. So that JSON here, context, task, friends, hikes, all of that reduces down to that. That's Toon format. So it really cuts down the number of tokens required, whilst the LLM still understands the same information as that JSON. You can convert from JSON to Toon and back from Toon to JSON. It's completely lossless, and the LLM understands the same information. So instead of adding an Apex class to Agentforce Vibes, we use Toon first and give the output to Agentforce Vibes. That's perfect. That's exactly it. And it doesn't matter if it's Agentforce Vibes or another vibe coding tool. The same rule applies. You just want to reduce the amount of input tokens and the amount of context tokens to hold the same thing. Can we also see the command line for Prettier? And I'll cover that in the next session, the command line tools and things. This is just more on the kind of the why things work and why those tools are important. Okay, So we're going to dive now into skills. So I'm going to go back to our context screen here. I'm going to duplicate it so we don't lose the original and come back. So I've got, let's just shrink this down. I've written a prompt. It's thinking, it's doing the work. Let's use that example earlier where we want it to do some Apex and an LWC to complete this task. If I write that, if I say, okay, I'm going to do my prompt, you're going to do the thinking. I then want you to do for the Apex. I then want you to do the prompt for the LWC. It's just going to end up shrinking and not doing as good a job because I've run out of context room for it. So what you can do instead is not do that and tell it, if I bring in, say, an arrow. Yeah, there we are. Nice arrow here. I could say, I want you to create a new agent over here, and it's going to have my a skill for Apex, and it's going to receive the prompt to do the work, and it can have a good old think about it over here. And that's my Apex code. Now, I want my LWC, so I can then spin it up and get it to run a sub-agent to do the LWC work. What happens is the output of this work, not all the thinking, not all the doing, not all the big log prompt, not all the skills on how to do stuff in Apex or LWC, just the output comes back to the main context. So the thinking shrinks, and I just have the result, the end results from those come back in. So I'm just going to call that a result and go for a purple. There we are. So my context is, I've not exceeded the length of my context. What I've done is used a separate context just for that task and retrieved the result. And over here, we've got a separate context just for that task and retrieve the result. So I'm not polluting this context. I'm not growing this context. So sub-agents, they can be background or foreground tasks. So if I do a foreground task, what it's going to do is pause before continuing. So if I brought it in as a foreground task, it would run this, return, then run this, then return. If I make them background tasks, it can run both of these in parallel. You can have as many background as you want, and then it all just comes back in. You can wait for certain background tasks to finish. So you might spin up 10 background tasks and say, wait for them to finish. Or you might spin up one that's deploying code and you don't care when it finishes. You just want to carry on coding in the foreground. So you can do these things. And you'll either use it when you want parallel work to happen or one-shot work. This, where we've got Apex and LWC happening, is called one-shot. So it's like, I want it to go off, do that, and give me the result. And that's it. If I've got something like I've got 10 files and I want to lint them, I want to correct errors, I want to correct spelling mistakes, I might do those 10 in parallel and then come back. When you spin up a sub-agent, the big thing is you're giving them skills. You can give them roles as well, but the idea is you give them a skill. They're a specialist. They do this one task and they do it well. And you keep their context light. You keep their context small. So they're a specialist. They do this one task. They know how to do it. That's great. And then your main context where you're living, where you're typing these commands that you want to do stuff, can keep its context low because it's not having to know how to do LWC. It's not needing to think about all the tasks it needs to do to build an LWC component. All it knows is I've asked this sub-agent to go and build it, and this is what it's come back with. So it's a coping mechanism for dealing with small models and allowing parallel work to happen. So questions, we've got sub-agents work in parallel sequential. Hopefully that makes sense with foreground and background. Can we pass input to a sub-agent or to another sub-agent if they run sequentially? So at the moment, there's an issue where when if you're running code here, you're interacting with an agent, it can call subagents, but those subagents can't call further subagents. So it's only one deep. You've got your agent and its subagents. You don't have subagents of subagents.
Uh,
You can
which,
pass. Oh, sorry, go for it.
So I think because the rest of the question was saying, um, for example, when we work with LWC and controller, like you create the Apex code first, and you define the method name, and then you refer to it in the JavaScript of LWC. So if you have now the two sub-agents, you have one creating the Apex, the LWC needs to know the method name or parameters it created. So how would you do that? I think
What you'll
that's
tend to do is something called contract first design.
hmm
So your main context will decide the contract, the API, the names of things that will be called, and then inform the subagents of them. So your LWC will now know to call those methods, and your Apex will know that it needs to define and implement those methods.
okay. And I assume that will be done with the medium-sized model where you do the deep planning.
Ideally, you'll come up with a medium-sized model, and take the output of the medium-sized model and enter that as the prompt here. So there'll be a further stage where you're working with like a big medium-sized model. Oh, so if I've got my medium-sized model, I don't have rules normally in my medium-sized model, but what I'll have is docs or reference material created by a large model. So I might have a few docs in here. And then what I'm going to do is ask for my prompt to be built. And then you're going to go back and forth with it, uh, improving that prompt, is improving that plan. So it might come back with a plan and you'll want to refine it. You'll want to discuss things. You want to think about things and see it in code and stuff.
Okay.
So
And the docs we are referring here, it's more like summarization for like best practices, documentation of syntax from Apex, LWC, more or less.
that's it. So if I go to agent docs, as an example, these are the ones that I've got on my project. So it might be LWC HTML templates, and it explains where files are, what the structure is, what the properties are, what's not allowed, what is allowed, all of the details. So this is like a doc for understanding LWC HTML templates for an AI agent.
Okay.
So
Uh,
I'd feed those in to you just drag and drop them normally into Sonnet, then you write your prompt for it, and then you go back and forth with it to refine the plan.
okay. So the output from this plan ideally will have the contract that's saying like the details. So the Apex and the LWC like sub-agents won't need to communicate or talk together, kind of.
That's it.
Oh.
You don't really want to think about communication between sub-agents. You want the main agent to delegate out and just get a response. So it's like a one-off function. Like you send the input, you get the response, and that's it. Like
Mhm.
think about it, yeah, calling a function and having a different scope to that function is a good way of thinking about it from a developer perspective.
Okay.
Cool. Can it go both ways in and out? As I was saying, just the input and the output. It's not like it has a running dialogue or anything like that. It's not that sophisticated. It's more fire it off. It has one chance to do its thing and it comes back. How about adding context whilst running a prompt? That's when you get into more sophisticated stuff. So what you could do is have a file. Like you normally work on a markdown file. So I'm just going to call it state. You can call it whatever you want.
Just
And you
for
might,
context, like for anyone is watching, like the question is asking, like when we work with Agentforce Vibes, you can add like custom field, custom object as a reference, another class as a reference, right, Beach? So,
yes,
mhm.
you could do indeed. You might also have a running dialogue of what are the agents up to? So, like a log file you might have, and you might have all of them dumping that information in. So, You might say in a prompt for this skill, give me a running dialogue, give me a running commentary of what you're building, and prefix each line with apex colon space. So you might now have a log file where you can see what each sub-agent was writing because you've asked it to. So
Oh,
this is kind of like a black box. You can't really see into the sub-agents. You can only see when they respond back. So if you want to see what they're doing as they go, you need to write the skill to save what you're doing as you're doing it to a file.
oh, okay. Okay. And the question, I guess, the way I understood it, Beach, it was asking like if we add like a reference to a class or a object, so Agentforce Vibes understand the structure of the project. So usually we add that, and when we type the prompt, Agentforce Vibes understand and is like grounded based on the context we added. So we will add that in the middle, but how that files or context files we added, will it be passed to the sub-agent or it will remain in this?
Thankfully, there's now, as of version 3.13, the latest preview release, there's a standardized way of doing this in Agentforce Vibes. And it's standard, it's an industry standard. You'll create a file, and I might even change the text color in a second to be legible. You'll have a file called agent.md where you define things that are global for the entire project, the way the project works, the way code is organized and things. You'll call it agent.md, and that is read by any of your sub-agents and agents. It's a good practice, instead of having one big org repo, to have separate repos for unlocked packages or managed packages and integrate them into your one org repo. So if you're doing something like an LWC component with custom Apex and things, you might want to do that in its own namespace, in its own unlocked package. That way, that context is very small. You can tune that agent to be very specific to that thing that it's doing. Um, and that becomes really focused. And then you can just deploy those unlocked packages to any org you need. So it's kind of, it really enforces that best practice as a Salesforce developer to get the best out of these tools. And that will also help your human developers as well. Can we see an agent.md file in the next session? Absolutely. We will be using best practices. We all need to on here. But I warn you, the second session, we're going to be going quickly. So a lot of these concepts, it's important to get down and understand them. I'll have a look as well at any of the comments that come up in YouTube. I can't promise to answer them, but if there's any comments following this, I'd quite like to get everyone on the same page before that second session. Last one, if I can quickly, and I'm aware of the time, we're rapidly running out on here, is just to tackle MCP. MCP's a big and scary term, but it's essentially just you sending rules down and tools down. So your rules can call tools like scripts and things. An MCP server is providing tools to your agent and the rules to say how to use them, when to use them. These tools can exist running on a remote server, but a lot of the time, what happens is these MCP servers, these things that provide these tools, actually run on your computer. That's true of Agentforce Vibes. It runs an MCP server on your computer, and all it's doing is you then calling the APIs for Salesforce to go and do things like go and get some metadata, go and retrieve this, go and deploy that, go and run a test locally, that kind of thing. So MCP, whilst it sounds scary, it's generally just running on your machine normally. Um, there's issues with authentication and stuff like that. So it's running on your machine normally, and it's just providing tools and the rules for how to use those tools. So you need to be very precise, because if you run it by default, you might just have rules that eat you all your context. If you're one of the people that just runs out and installs every MCP server and runs them all the time, your context is just getting eaten up alive by it. So you want to streamline these MCP servers. You want to reduce down the number of tools and make them very precise. And that goes back to the concept of having like sub agents and skills. If you create a sub agent that's got a trimmed down MCP server, that's got trimmed down rules, and just does what one task, it's going to have more room to think. Because whilst I've shown it as a smaller box, in reality, it's the same as all the other boxes height wise. You've got all that extra room for it to think and play with and give you better results in. So MCP, no different than scripts and tools and things that you're running. And generally, it's just running on your computer anyway and interacting with APIs. You can create your own scripts to replace MCP and just write rules. You could create your own MCP servers. The Salesforce MCP server is open source. You can fork it. You can customize it. You can configure it to your needs. Don't just open Agentforce Vibes and leave your MCP server on default. You really want to hone it down. There's things like mobile LWC components, which you're probably not going to use on a daily basis. You probably want to turn that off to give you more context to get better results. Is Subagent possible in Agentforce Vibes? Not yet, but it's coming. We don't know fully the form. It's available for Cursor. It's available for Claude, and the team are committed to producing it, but I can't reveal details because it's all subject to change. Forward-looking statement and all of that. How are rules and skills are different? They're not really, apart from their semantic meaning. So it's no different than a prompt, even. What's the difference between a rule, a prompt, and a skill? Not really anything. It's just what you've sort of fed text-wise or token-wise to your LLM. We just refer to it as a rule because rules you can enable, you can disable, they can be context aware. A sub agent may use the same rules. You're not going to reuse skills. So a skill is only for a sub agent. Docs, they may be used by a sub agent or an agent or by a human. So it's just what semantic meaning do we put to things? How do we organize stuff to keep it easy to manage? And is skill a rule in a sub agent? Yeah, basically, it's all the same thing. You could just not have any skills or any rules and just prompt everything as well. You can just copy and paste a prompt. It's just how should you organize things to keep your projects manageable? Okay, I think that's been a lot. That's everything I wanted to convey. Are there any questions?
I don't see questions in the chat, but I think there would be a lot of questions when people like watch the video again, like even myself, like I think I have to rewatch it and like I'm sure we'll have more questions. So I think if anyone has a question, they can send it to me or comment on YouTube video and we'll try either like to answer the questions before the session or have a brief, like maybe a Beech, if you agree, like at the beginning of the next session is a brief moment before starting. We receive those questions. Let's address them before starting. But I
Cool.
think the big question is like, can we have the next session soon? And can we have it like as a super long? Because you have a lot, like you you explained a lot and it made sense to hear it. But I think everyone, including myself, like, like we want to see it in action. So
Cool.
that's,
I,
I
I,
guess,
I
the
want in
question.
within about 2 to 4 weeks is when I'd like, but we'll discuss offline to get that
Yes,
booked in.
yes. Let's
Cool.
let's plan it soon. And yeah, again, like I cannot thank you enough, Beach. I think it was very useful to hear all those details, keywords, and understand them. And I believe a lot of questions will come and but a lot of learning. Like we gained a lot of information and we are grateful for your generosity and your time and the ability to join the session and as well like your time for the next session. It means a lot. And I cannot thank you enough. And we'll be in touch with everyone. We'll let you know on Code with Sally LinkedIn page when is the next session, and we'll make sure like to um, put the video as soon as we can as well on YouTube so you can watch it, make sense of it. If you have any question, comment on the video or send to me, and like make sure like to collect all the similar questions together and filter them, and I will share them with you, Beach, and we see like whether we'll answer them offline, even like with short video together, or we'll have it at the starting of the next session. So thank you so much. It was a great pleasure to have you here, and we really appreciate everything you're doing.
Well, thank you for having me, and no one be scared. This is not scary. It just changes quickly. Cool.
Super, super quickly. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye.